The man who tried to murder a child in my church is now the most devout parishioner I have ever known. That is the impossible truth I must now try to explain. It haunts me. Every waking moment, every quiet prayer. It is an impossible contradiction that lives and breathes. A walking, breathing testament to a divine intervention that shattered my understanding of the world and reshaped the very foundations of my faith. I remember the weight of the host in my hands, the sacred silence, then the terror. It wasn't a gentle whisper of dread. It was a thunderclap, a visceral blow to the soul that reverberates through me still, even as I speak these words to you now, years later. I still see it in flashes of memory, sharp and unyielding, cutting through the calm of my days. The Sunday Mass, routine and reverent, dissolved into chaos. The comforting scent of old incense, a smell usually synonymous with peace and solemnity, suddenly seemed to choke the air, thick with a sudden unbearable tension. Then came the scream, not a child's cry of fright, but a primal piercing shriek from the pews, tearing through the sacred space, ripping the serene fabric of worship to shreds. It was a sound that curdled the blood, a sound of absolute, unmitigated horror. My head snapped up, my gaze drawn instantly to the source. The glint. Oh, the terrible glint. A hunting knife, its sharpened edge catching the flicker of the altar candles, transforming the sacred light into a beacon of malevolence. It was raised high, an arc of cold steel against the warmth of the sanctuary. And then the blur, a dark shape, a man-sized shadow, moving with a speed that defied human grace, rushing the sanctuary, a predator unleashed in the sheepfold. My breath caught, lodged somewhere deep in my chest, a physical obstruction to any sound, any prayer, any warning I might have tried to utter. My priestly vestments, usually a source of comfort and authority, felt like a shroud, heavy and confining, binding me in place. I remember the collective gasp. 200 souls gathered in reverence, suddenly sucking the very air from the room. It was a vacuum of terror, a shared moment of absolute, paralyzing disbelief. The sound was not a cacophony but an abrupt, horrified silence, heavier and more terrifying than any scream. Every eye, every soul, fixed on the looming danger. Time seemed to distend, stretching thin, each microsecond an eternity, each heartbeat a hammer blow against my ribs. My heart pounded, a frantic drum in the cavern of my chest, its rhythm echoing the frantic pace of the assailant. And I remember the face of a lost, hate-filled young man, contorted by a rage so profound, so consuming, that it seemed to devour all light, all reason, all humanity. His eyes, burning with a cold, desperate fire, were fixed not on me, but on the small, innocent figure beside me, Leo, my altar server, 10 years old. His face, usually alight with faith, now frozen in a mask of innocent confusion, his small hands still clasped in prayer, unaware of the death descending upon him. The young man's arm was raised, the knife a deadly extension of his hatred, poised to strike the most innocent among us, to extinguish a life, to desecrate the very altar of God. My mind screamed, words of exorcism, prayers of protection, desperate pleas to heaven. They all collided in a silent explosion of terror and impotence within my skull. I was a priest, a shepherd, sworn to protect my flock, and in that moment I was utterly, terribly, undeniably helpless. The knife began its downward arc. The trajectory was clear, unstoppable, inevitable. The sheer speed of it, the cold, unyielding purpose behind the attacker's eyes, left no room for doubt. This was not a warning, this was an execution. But then, what happened in the split second between that intended, murderous blow and the impossible echoing clatter of steel on marble was not just improbable, it was a direct, blinding refutation of the laws of physics, a violent shattering of every natural expectation. It was a sudden, profound, and utterly undeniable affirmation of the laws of God. The weapon fell. The child stood unharmed. The attacker, only moments before a vessel of pure, destructive rage, crumpled to his knees, not in triumph, but in a profound, soul-shattering agony. His hands clasped, his head bowed, as if in prayer. It was an outcome so utterly devoid of rational explanation, so startlingly, violently miraculous, that it continues to unravel my understanding of existence. My mind, trained in logic and theology, still struggles to reconcile the before and after, the cause and the effect. I did not see a blur of movement that stopped the knife. I saw no physical force intervene. What I witnessed was a moment outside of time, a tear in the fabric of reality, where the will of man, hell-bent on destruction, met something unimaginably greater, something divine, something that silenced the rage, disarmed the killer, and left behind not a corpse, but a shattered, weeping soul. This contradiction, this impossible transformation born from a moment of ultimate evil, is the burden I carry, the truth I must now share. It demands to be told. It demands to be understood. How could a man, driven by such venomous hatred, transformed in an instant into a figure of profound reverence? How could such a horrifying act be averted, not by human strength, but by a force invisible yet undeniably present? The story of how this happened, of the blinding truth revealed in that hallowed second, is what I now feel compelled, by God's grace and my own shattered peace, to recount. And trust me, dear reader, it is a story that will challenge everything you think you know about faith, despair, and the impossible mercy of God. The impossible truth, as I hinted, demands a prelude, a setting of the stage where such an event could even conceive of unfolding. For without understanding the soil, truly, you cannot grasp the nature of the seed that grew there, nor the astonishing blossom it bore. So, before I speak of the miracle itself, of the blinding truth revealed in that hallowed second when time itself seemed to bow before eternity, you must first understand my parish, St. Jude's. We are named fittingly for the patron saint of lost causes. Not in a cynical way, mind you, but with a quiet, persistent hope that only those truly acquainted with the depths of human struggle can possess. St. Jude, the forgotten apostle, the one called upon when all seems hopeless. His patronage felt less like a conscious choice made by our founders centuries ago, and more like a simple, undeniable fact for our community, woven into the very fabric of its being. His intercession, often invoked in hushed, desperate whispers, was a comfort, a lifeline in a world that so often felt devoid of grace. Our small Stoic church, with its modest steeple pointing a weathered finger towards an often unresponsive heaven, stands tucked away in a corner of the city that progress forgot. It's a place where the brickwork crumbles gently, shedding reddish dust onto the cracked sidewalks, where the asphalt of the parking lot cracks like an old man's skin, spiderwebbed with weeds valiantly pushing through, and where the air often carries the faint, mingled sense of damp earth, distant diesel exhaust from the nearby bus depot, and the faint, sweet decay of forgotten ambitions. There's also, on certain days, the subtle, comforting smell of old wood polish, and generations of incense clinging to the sanctuary's ancient rafters, a scent that speaks of enduring prayer. Here the grand gleaming towers of downtown fade into a distant mirage, a world apart, glimpsed only as a faint shimmer against the twilight sky. Our streets are lined with houses that have seen better decades, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin, revealing layers of pastels and muted tones beneath, their small gardens valiantly trying to hold back the encroaching weeds and city grit. The laughter of children playing hopscotch on cracked sidewalks is a fragile counterpoint to the wail of distant sirens, a constant mournful backdrop to daily life. Sometimes I would watch them from the rectory window, their innocence a stark contrast to the hard edges of their surroundings, and offer a silent prayer for their protection. For many, St. Jude's is not just a geographical location. It's a spiritual address, a last resort. We are the place where the world's discarded come to find solace, where the broken try to piece themselves back together from the shards of lost dreams, where the dispossessed seek a fleeting moment of peace, a quiet corner in a loud, demanding world. The wooden pews, worn smooth by countless hands and bodies, bear witness to untold sorrows and whispered hopes. The very air inside seems to hum with the echoes of confessions, prayers, and silent tears shed over generations. In such a place, faith is not an abstract theological exercise, a matter of intellectual assent. No, here, faith is a shield. It is a stubborn, often battered, but absolutely essential defense against the daily abrasions of poverty, the suffocating grip of addiction, and the crushing weight of despair. I've seen it woven into the very fabric of their lives, not as an academic pursuit or a philosophical debate, but as a guttural cry from the depths of the soul, a quiet resilience in the face of relentless hardship, a desperate clinging to a promise that, in their lives, often feels terribly far away, almost beyond reach. It is the belief that even when all earthly hope is gone, there is still a divine hand holding them, however tenuously. I remember Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, her hands gnarled and rough from years of scrubbing floors in office buildings downtown, coming to me in tears one cold Tuesday afternoon. Her face, usually a roadmap of quiet strength, was crumpled with desperation. She clutched a crumpled notice from the electric company, the sharp white paper a stark contrast to a dark, worn cardigan. Her husband, God rest his soul, had died 2 years prior, leaving her with 3 hungry mouths and a pension that barely covered rent on their small, drafty apartment. "Father Michael," she whispered, her voice a thin, reedy thing, barely audible above the ancient clock ticking in the rectory parlor. "We are going to be in the dark. How can I tell my grandchildren that God has forgotten us?" Her eyes, usually so full of gentle resignation, were brimming with a raw, primal fear. And what could I say? My heart ached for her. I could offer practical help, yes, a call to the diocese emergency fund, a rummage through the parish's meager coffers for some immediate assistance. But more than that, I knew I needed to offer a quiet presence, a listening ear, a shared prayer, reminding her that even in the deepest darkness, God's light, though unseen and sometimes unfelt, was never truly extinguished. I took her gnarled hands in mine, rough against my own, and we prayed together, our voices a soft murmur in the quiet room. Her faith wasn't about avoiding hardship, it was about enduring it, day by painful day, with the conviction that she was not truly alone, that her suffering held some unseen purpose in the grand tapestry of God's will. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking testament to the power of belief. Then there was young Mark, barely 20, his eyes hollowed by an addiction that had taken his job, his family, and nearly his life. He'd stumble into the back of the church during weekday mass, his body trembling, a tremor that ran through him like a constant vibration, his spirit ravaged by choices he barely remembered making. He wouldn't come forward for communion, convinced he was too far gone, too impure, his shame a heavy cloak around him. But he would sit, sometimes for hours after mass, long after the last hymn had faded, just breathing in the scent of old incense, the quiet solitude of the empty pews. He told me once, his voice raspy, dry from disuse and despair, that the church was the only place he felt clean, even if just for a moment, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing dirtiness he felt within himself. His faith wasn't about moral perfection, it was about the desperate yearning for it, the silent acknowledgement of a need for something beyond himself, a fragile hope that he might yet be reclaimed from the wreckage of his life. I saw in his eyes, despite the haze of his illness, a flicker of that same desperate hope, and I prayed for it to ignite. These were my flock, my weary, beloved sheep. I spent my days not just behind the altar, solemn and robed, but in the trenches of their lives, feeling the grit and grime of their daily struggles. I was a counselor for grieving mothers, their faces etched with the unspeakable pain of a child lost too soon, too violently, or too tragically. I sat with them, offering words that felt thin and inadequate against the crushing weight of their sorrow, but mostly offering the quiet strength of presence, of shared sorrow, of a God who, I truly believed, weeps with his children. Their grief was often so palpable it felt like a physical presence in the room, making my own heart heavy. I became a reluctant social worker, navigating the labyrinthine bureaucracy of city shelters and charity organizations, feeling like a tiny boat on a vast, churning sea, finding beds for the homeless in the bitter winter months when the cold seeped into bones and the wind howled like a banshee through the alleyways. Often, I felt like I was bailing out a sinking ship with a thimble, watching the water rise inexorably despite my best efforts. And every week I would stare at the collection basket, its worn velvet interior often containing more pennies than paper, praying that its meager contents would cover the heating bill for the drafts-ridden old rectory and the perpetually leaky roof of the church itself. There was a constant, gnawing anxiety, a low hum beneath the surface of my pastoral duties, a quiet fear that we were always on the brink, always just one crisis away from true collapse, from having to shutter the doors of St. Jude's forever. In this landscape of struggle and quiet desperation, my flock was indeed weary. They carried their burdens with a stoic dignity, a faith forged in the crucible of hardship, but their shoulders were often hunched, their eyes often shadowed with exhaustion, reflecting the long, uphill climb of their lives. Hope, for many, was a flickering candle flame in a gusty room, easily extinguished by the relentless winds of their daily lives. And yet, even in this parish of lost causes, even amidst the heavy weight of sorrow and scarcity, there were beacons of light, small miracles of grace that kept the larger flame of St. Jude's alive. They were the unexpected kindnesses, the selfless acts, the quiet perseverance that spoke volumes. One of the brightest of these indeed, the very heart of our parish in those days, was a boy named Leo. He was 10 years old, small for his age, with eyes that held an uncanny depth, an ancient wisdom that belied his few years. He was an altar server, and for him it was not merely a duty, a rote task performed before Sunday breakfast, but a sacred calling, a profound privilege. I remember him best in his alb, slightly too large, the hem often brushing the floor, making him look like a miniature priest, a tiny shepherd tending to the sacred. He moved with a quiet reverence, his small hands carefully handling the cruets of water and wine, his posture perfectly still during the readings, his gaze fixed on the altar with an unwavering intensity that put many adults to shame, causing me to reflect on my own wandering thoughts sometimes during the liturgy. Leo's faith wasn't learned from catechism books alone. It seemed to spring from some deep, pure wellspring within him, an intuitive, uncomplicated trust, a profound understanding of the sacred that few of us ever truly achieve. He would ask questions sometimes after Mass, simple queries that held staggering theological weight. "Father Michael," he once asked me, his brow furrowed in earnest thought, his voice soft but clear. When Jesus said, "This is my body," did he mean it with his whole heart? Not just like a symbol, but truly, truly himself? And I remember looking down at him, a sudden catch in my own throat, realizing that his simple query cut through all the academic discourse, all the philosophical debates I'd heard and participated in over the years, straight to the core of the real presence with a clarity and purity that only a child's unspoiled heart could find. He saw past the veil of ordinary bread to the divine mystery beneath, a gift I envied. His presence in the sanctuary was a sermon in itself. He reminded us all, me included, when my own faith felt stretched thin by the unending demands of the parish, of the purity we were striving for, the goodness that still resided within the human spirit, untouched by the world's cynicism and the constant erosion of hope. He never fidgeted, never seemed bored during even the longest homilies. During the liturgy of the Eucharist, his small hands would be clasped tightly, his head bowed, his face a mask of such sincere devotion that it was impossible not to be moved, to feel a surge of renewed faith simply by watching him. When he looked up at the host during the elevation, there was an awe in his eyes that could pierce through the most jaded soul, a glimmer of the divine reflected in their depths. He saw, truly saw, what we adults often struggle to merely believe, to accept with our intellects rather than our hearts. Leo was not just a boy, he was a living symbol. He was the innocence we sought to protect, the future we hoped to nourish, the unblemished faith that served as a gentle, constant rebuke to the despair that threatened to engulf us. He was a beacon, shining brightly amidst the shadows of St. Jude's, reminding us that despite all the lost causes, despite the weariness and the struggle, God's grace was still present, still vibrant, still utterly real. He was the heart of our parish, and it was his pure, unwavering devotion, his very being, that would soon stand at the precipice of an unimaginable darkness, poised to receive an equally unimaginable light, a light that would redefine everything we thought we knew about faith and miracles. The purity of Leo's faith, his unblemished soul, was a balm, a quiet affirmation in a parish often besieged by shadows. He was a promise, a gentle echo of Christ's own words, "Unless you become like little children." But for every beacon like Leo, there was a soul adrift, lost not in the physical labyrinth of our city, but in the spiritual wilderness of despair. It is to one such soul that our story must now turn, for he was the storm cloud gathering on our horizon, the profound darkness against which Leo's light would soon, unimaginably, be tested. The young man with the knife was named Thomas. I knew him, yes, but not as one knows a regular parishioner, not as one knows the comforting familiarity of a face seen week after week in the pews, sharing a nod, a brief exchange after Mass, a petition for prayer. No, Thomas was different. I knew him as a ghost, a haunting presence who skirted the edges of our periphery, never fully stepping into the light, yet never truly disappearing into the city's shadows. He was an enigma wrapped in an aura of simmering pain, a figure I would glimpse across the street, his silhouette stark against the setting sun, his eyes, even from a distance, conveying a raw, unsettling intensity as they fixed upon the old stone edifice of St. Jude's. He was there, always there, yet never with us. A man perpetually outside, looking in with a gaze that held neither longing nor curiosity, but something far more potent and unsettling, a cold, quiet anger. To understand Thomas, one must understand the crucible of his suffering, the furnace in which his grief had been forged into such a bitter, intractable rage. 2 years prior, a swift and cruel cancer had stolen his younger sister Lily from this world. Lily, a child of 10, much like Leo, with a laugh that tinkled like chimes in the summer breeze, and an imagination that painted the world in vibrant hues. She had been a cherished member of our community, a bright, curious girl who loved to draw pictures of angels with enormous feathered wings and bring them to me after Mass. Her illness had descended upon their family like a sudden, unforeseen avalanche. One day she was skipping stones by the creek. The next, she was languishing in a hospital bed, her once vibrant spirit slowly, inexorably being extinguished. Their family, once pillars of faith, had been shattered by the ordeal. I remember them, the Millers, devout Catholics whose faith had seemed as sturdy and unyielding as the ancient oak that stood sentinel in front of their small, well-kept home. They had prayed novenas, their voices hoarse with desperate pleas for divine intervention. They had stormed heaven with rosaries, each bead a tear, each Hail Mary a fervent cry for mercy. They had begged for a miracle, not with the quiet resignation of the truly pious, but with the raw, guttural desperation of parents watching their child slip away. And I, as their priest, had prayed alongside them, my own heart aching with the inadequacy of human comfort in the face of such profound, innocent suffering. I anointed Lily with the oil of the sick, whispering ancient prayers for healing, feeling the small, frail warmth of her hand in mine, and in my heart, I too pleaded with the heavens for a sign, a reprieve, a miracle. But the miracle, as they understood it, never came. Lily's breath grew shallower, her spirit dimmed, and one crisp autumn morning, she simply ceased to be. The silence that followed her passing was not merely the absence of sound, it was a vacuum that sucked all joy, all hope, all faith from their lives. The funeral was a blur of hushed condolences and the sterile scent of lilies, but for Thomas it was something far deeper, far more destructive. He was 17 then, on the cusp of manhood, still possessing that youthful idealism that sees the world in stark rights and wrongs, in promises made and promises broken. He had witnessed his family's fervent prayers, seen their unwavering conviction that God would not abandon them, and then he had seen the outcome. For him, the God they had so earnestly invoked had simply failed to show up. He had abandoned them. His grief, which should have been a purifying fire, instead curdled into a cold, simmering rage. It festered, an open wound that refused to heal, growing ever more venomous with each passing day. It was a rage directed not at the doctors, not at the indifferent cruelty of the disease, but squarely, fiercely, at the God he believed had abandoned him and his precious sister. He saw God not as a loving father, but as a capricious, cruel potentate who delighted in the suffering of the innocent. And our church, St. Jude's, became for him the embodiment of that cruel, indifferent deity. It was the house of the God who had turned his back, the place where empty promises were whispered, and unheard prayers evaporated into the cold, vaulted ceilings. I saw him often, as I mentioned, a solitary figure, always alone. He would stand across the street, sometimes leaning against the old elm tree, sometimes just a dark silhouette against the laundromat's neon glow. His eyes, even from that distance, held an unnerving intensity, a laser-like focus on the church's front doors. It was not a gaze of nostalgia, nor one of simple curiosity. It was accusatory, a silent indictment, as if he were daring the very stones of the building to prove him wrong. His posture was always tense, his shoulders hunched, his hands often jammed deep into his pockets, as if clutching something hidden, something unspeakable. His face, once open and boyish, had hardened into a mask of grim determination, etched with lines of premature weariness. There was a hollow quality to his movements, an absence of the vibrant energy that should define a young man. He was a shadow indeed, not just physically but spiritually. A priest develops a certain intuition, a spiritual antennae that vibrates with the unseen currents of human suffering. With Thomas, my antennae were always buzzing, a low, persistent hum of disquiet. My heart ached for him, truly. I saw not a villain but a wounded child, a soul trapped in a labyrinth of pain and anger. I knew the depth of his loss, the unfairness of it all, and I understood, intellectually at least, how such profound suffering could twist and distort one's perception of God. It is a terrible thing to witness faith shatter, to see a vibrant spirit wither under the weight of an unanswerable question. Why? I tried to reach out to him, of course. It is my vocation, my sacred duty, to seek out the lost sheep, to offer comfort, to extend the hand of Christ's mercy even to those who reject it. I approached him one afternoon, when he was standing by the elm, watching the setting sun cast long shadows over the churchyard. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, a peaceful evening belying the storm within this young man. "Thomas," I said gently, my voice soft, not wanting to startle him. He had not seen me approach, and he flinched, his body tensing like a coiled spring. His eyes, when they met mine, were pools of frozen anger, devoid of warmth or recognition, despite our shared history. "Father Michael," he replied, his voice flat, devoid of inflection, a monotone that grated against the quiet reverence of the evening. It wasn't a greeting so much as an acknowledgement of my presence, an unwelcome intrusion. "It's been a while, my son," I offered, trying to infuse warmth into my words. "I've been praying for you and your family." He scoffed, a short, sharp sound that was more a sneer than a breath. "Prayers," he bit out, the word dripping with contempt. "Did your prayers help Lily, Father?" The directness of his challenge, the raw edge of his pain struck me. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "God's ways are not always our ways, Thomas," I began, falling back on the old theological truths. "And his love sometimes manifests in mysteries we cannot comprehend in this life. But his love is always present, even in suffering." He laughed then, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed the emptiness in his eyes. "Present?" he repeated, shaking his head slowly, a grim smile playing on his lips. "If his love was present, Father, where was he when she was choking on her own blood? Where was he when she cried out, begging for it to stop? Was that his love, Father? To watch a 10-year-old suffer for months and then die? His voice had risen, each word a venomous dart aimed directly at the heart of my faith. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the burden of a priest who knows he cannot argue with such profound anguish. He was there, Thomas, I insisted, my voice firm but gentle, suffering with her, as he suffered on the cross. He doesn't abandon us in our pain. He enters into it with us. He took a step back, his eyes narrowing, and the quiet venom returned to his tone, chilling me to the bone. Don't you dare talk about suffering, Father. You, with your warm church and your comfortable sermons, you don't know what suffering is. You preach about a God who cares. But all I saw was a God who stood by and watched, a God who broke his promises. He looked at the church, then back at me, his gaze full of a profound, dismissive scorn. Keep your prayers, Father. They're worthless. And then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the encroaching twilight, leaving me standing alone, the silence suddenly heavy, laden with the weight of his words. That encounter was not unique. There were others, brief, painful exchanges, each one a futile attempt on my part to bridge the chasm that had opened between him and God, between him and the community that still remembered his sister with fondness. Each time he met my words with that quiet, venomous scorn, a defensive shield against any comfort I might offer, any ray of hope I might try to extend. He was not just angry, he was wounded, and in his wound, he found a perverse strength, a justification for his hatred. He was a soul adrift, an orphan spirit in an ocean of pain, and I, for all my years of study, all my pastoral experience, did not know how to build him a lifeline. I prayed for him, ceaselessly. I offered masses for his peace, for his healing, for the return of his faith. But each time I saw him, lurking in the shadows, his presence was a stark reminder of my own limitations, of the intractable nature of human suffering when it curdles into such bitter resentment. He was a challenge to my faith, not in its existence, but in its efficacy. How could a loving God allow such pain to turn a soul so completely against him? How could a priest, called to be an instrument of that love, feel so utterly helpless in its face? Thomas was the embodiment of a lost cause, a stark counterpoint to the quiet resilience of St. Jude's. He was the darkness that loomed, an unspoken threat, a wound in the fabric of our community that refused to heal. And I, in my priestly heart, carried the heavy burden of his lostness, never truly knowing, never truly comprehending, the depths of the darkness he nursed, the violent desperation that would soon drive him to an act of unspeakable horror, an act that would shatter the sacred peace of our sanctuary, and in doing so, invite a light that would redefine everything. The morning of the First Holy Communion dawned with a crisp, almost unearthly clarity, washing over St. Jude's with a light so pure it seemed to scrub away the usual city grime that clung stubbornly to our old, tired bricks. It wasn't merely the absence of morning fog or industrial haze, it was a luminescence that felt intentional. A divine finger tracing the outlines of our forgotten corner of the city, bringing an unexpected gentle radiance to the weathered faces of our buildings. This light, both soft and penetrating, seemed to infuse the very air, making each breath feel cleaner, each shadow less oppressive. It was a day that shimmered with an air of profound anticipation, a profound, sacred anticipation, a day meant to be a balm for the weary souls who gathered within our walls. For weeks the children, those precious, eager lambs, had been diligently preparing, their little hearts bursting with an earnest wonder that reminded us all of the simple, unvarnished beauty of faith. I could still hear the echo of their small, sweet voices practicing the responses, sometimes stumbling over the Latin phrases, then giggling, only to quickly regain their solemnity, their eyes wide with the magnitude of the mystery they were about to embrace. Their innocence was a teaching in itself, a testament to a faith unburdened by the cynicism and sorrows of adulthood. I remember the scent, vivid as if it were yesterday, of freshly cut lilies, their waxy white petals unfurling in triumphant bursts, arranged with meticulous care throughout the sanctuary. Their heady, sweet perfume mingled with the faint, comforting fragrance of lemon polish and ancient wood that was the very breath of our old sanctuary. These were not the usual sparse arrangements, the few dutiful blooms that graced our altar on ordinary Sundays. Mrs. Rodriguez, bless her meticulous, loving soul, had truly outdone herself. Her hands, gnarled by years of honest labor and tireless service, had transformed the altar into a veritable garden, a foretaste of heaven's bounty. Each lily stood tall, a white flame against the dark wood, seeming to vibrate with the sheer joy of the occasion. The church itself, usually a quiet sanctuary of scattered faithful on a typical Sunday, was vibrant, alive, positively overflowing with a joyous clamor. The hushed reverence of everyday Mass was replaced by a gentle hum of excited whispers, the rustle of special clothes, and the soft, excited patter of small feet. Every pew groaned under the weight of families, generations gathered together, a living tapestry woven with the threads of hope and familial love. I saw proud parents, their faces alight with a mixture of pride and emotion, meticulously adjusting starched collars and the delicate lace of fluffy white veils, their hearts surely swelling with the significance of their child's first step into the heart of the Eucharist. Beaming grandparents, their eyes crinkling at the corners with age and profound tenderness, clutched well-worn rosaries in one hand and disposable cameras in the other, ready to capture every fleeting moment. Older siblings, some trying and mostly failing to suppress their youthful exuberance, exchanged excited glances, sharing in the collective thrill of the day. Each face was a testament to the enduring power of tradition, of the profound, sacred act of passing on the flame of faith to the next eager generation. Little hands, scrubbed clean and trembling with a mixture of excitement and solemnity, clutched their brand-new prayer books, their fingers tracing the gold-embossed cross on the cover. Little voices, usually boisterous and unrestrained, were hushed with a solemnity that bordered on awe, their eyes wide and innocent as they gazed at the tabernacle, that sacred golden box, a tangible sign of the mystery they were about to embrace. It was a beautiful chaos, a holy din, a symphony of faith alive and flourishing. And then there was Leo. He stood out even among the other altar servers, his slight frame clad in a freshly laundered alb, its white fabric almost glowing in the morning light, his fair hair neatly combed and falling softly across his brow. He possessed a stillness, a quiet intensity that transcended his 10 years, a spiritual maturity that was truly remarkable. Leo wasn't just serving, he was participating, every gesture imbued with a sincere reverence that spoke volumes more than any sermon. His hands, small but steady, were folded in perfect prayer, his eyes fixed on the altar with an unwavering devotion that was truly humbling to witness. There was an earnestness in his gaze, a complete surrender to the sacred moment, that made him to me the very embodiment of the innocence and purity that First Holy Communion represented, a vessel open and ready to receive Christ. Looking at him, one could not help but feel a resurgence of hope, a gentle nudge toward the goodness that, despite the world's harshness, still blossomed in the human heart. He was, in a very real sense, the heart of our small, struggling parish, a beacon of simple, unshakable faith, a quiet reminder that even in our weary corner of the world, grace found fertile ground. I stood in the sacristy, vesting for Mass, the heavy brocade chasuble settling over my shoulders like a comforting embrace. Each movement was deliberate, a ritual perfected over decades, designed to prepare not just the body, but the soul for the profound encounter to come. My fingers, accustomed to the silk and gold thread, meticulously fastened the clasps of the stole, a symbol of priestly authority and service. As I adjusted my vestments, I gazed at my reflection in the old, mottled mirror, its silvered surface imperfectly reflecting the man who stood before it. My own face, lined with the years of pastoral care and quiet anxieties that are the constant companions of a parish priest, was framed by the sacred vestments. A priest, I often thought, is like a shepherd, called to guide, protect, and feed his flock. On days like this, the flock was not just gathered, it was blooming, thriving, bursting with new life and renewed purpose. The air in the sacristy, usually silent, buzzed with a palpable sense of occasion, a collective breath of anticipation that reached even into that quiet space. It was a day of profound significance, a moment when these children would take their first tangible step into the heart of our Catholic faith, receiving the very body and blood of Christ. The magnitude of it, the sheer holiness, settled over me like a benediction, a gentle weight on my soul. My heart, despite the underlying current of worry that always hummed beneath the surface of my daily life at St. Jude's, the constant struggle against poverty, the persistent whisper of dwindling attendance, the ever-present shadow of despair in our community, swelled with a profound, almost overwhelming joy. This joy was pure, unadulterated, a gift from heaven. As I processed down the main aisle, my steps measured and slow, the opening hymn, sung with an unusual fervor and volume, filled the nave, its notes reverberating off the vaulted ceiling and resonating deep within my chest. The hymn, "All Creatures of Our God and King," felt particularly apt, a celebration of creation and the Creator's boundless love, a perfect overture for a day dedicated to spiritual renewal. My eyes, accustomed to scanning the congregation for familiar faces, for those who might be missing, for any sign of distress or joy, drifted naturally to the back pews, seeking the comforting rhythm of our usual faithful. And then I saw him, Thomas. He was a dark silhouette, almost swallowed by the deeper shadows that clung to the farthest corner of the church, as if the very light of the morning struggled to penetrate his chosen refuge. He sat hunched, his shoulders drawn inward, his body language a tight, coiled spring, his face partially obscured by the downward tilt of his head, avoiding the light, avoiding detection. He wore no suit, no tie, no concession to the festive occasion. His clothes were dark, unassuming, an almost deliberate attempt to blend into the gloom, to become an invisible observer, a ghost haunting the periphery, just as he had often done before. Yet, to me, he shone with an unnerving intensity, a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious symphony of the morning. His very presence was an anomaly, a jagged shard of pain amidst the soft glowing warmth of communal joy. But this time something felt different. This time his presence was not merely a sad echo of past grief. It was a foreboding presence, a deep chill that snaked its way into my bones, like a sudden draft on a warm day. A priest develops a certain instinct, a spiritual disquiet, much like a shepherd recognizes the scent of a wolf on the wind, even before it fully emerges from the trees. It's not just a feeling of unease, a flicker of discomfort. It's a profound disturbance in the spiritual atmosphere, a sense that the sacred space has been breached not by accident, but by deliberate, malicious intent. My heart, which had just moments before been soaring with the collective joy of the faithful, now plummeted, a cold dread coiling in my stomach like a serpent. It was an instinct honed over years of ministering to souls, of witnessing the subtle, often unseen interplay between light and shadow, grace and despair. This was not the restless fidgeting of a bored attendee, nor the quiet anguish of a grieving soul seeking solace. This was something darker, more menacing. It felt like an intrusion, a deliberate disruption of the holy, a challenge to the very sanctuary of God. I forced myself to continue the procession, my steps measured, my voice steady as I reached the altar and bowed, a silent prayer of dedication on my lips. But inside, a quiet alarm blared, an insistent shrill warning in the chambers of my soul. My eyes, though seemingly focused on the missal, darted furtively, almost imperceptibly to the back of the church. Thomas remained motionless, a statue carved from shadow, a disturbing anchor in the sea of celebrating families. He wasn't participating, he was observing, a predator studying its prey. His gaze, even from that distance, felt heavy, burning, fixed on something, or someone, within the sanctuary. And then I understood, with a sickening certainty, that his presence was not random, nor was it for solace. It was an act of deliberate, simmering antagonism, a challenge to the very sanctity of the moment, to the purity of these children, to the presence of God himself. The opening rites unfolded, the familiar words a comforting mantra, a liturgy older than many nations. Yet my awareness of Thomas never truly receded. He was a stone in my shoe, a persistent dissonance in the sacred melody of the Mass. I led the congregation in the Kyrie, then the Gloria, my voice ringing out, trying to imbue each word with the hope and joy the day demanded. Even as my heart felt heavy, weighed down by an unspoken premonition, the readings were proclaimed, and then came the Gospel, followed by my homily. My topic, chosen weeks ago, was on the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, a theme I had felt particularly called to emphasize for the first communicants, to impress upon their young, open hearts the incredible mystery they were about to encounter. It felt almost providential now. An ironic preparation for the unseen battle brewing, a stark contrast between divine love and human hatred. I spoke of God's boundless love, of his profound desire to make himself physically present to us, to become our sustenance, our very life, transforming simple bread and wine into his body and blood. I spoke of the miracle of the Mass, how heaven stoops to touch earth, how the divine enters the mundane, a timeless, sacred embrace. As I preached, I kept a part of my consciousness attuned to Thomas. He hadn't moved. His stillness was unnerving, an almost unnatural repose, like a beast waiting to strike. He was a silent, brooding storm cloud on an otherwise radiant day, a dark counterpoint to the vibrant joy that filled every other corner of the church. How could I speak of love and presence, of communion and grace, when a soul in our midst was so utterly consumed by a destructive, defiant rage? The thought was a painful knot in my chest, a tightening in my throat. My words, meant to uplift and inspire, felt hollowed out, made fragile by the raw vulnerability of our situation, the fragile peace of our sanctuary. I looked at Leo, his face upturned, absorbing every word with an almost fierce concentration, his small hand still perfectly folded, and a fresh wave of fear, cold and sharp, washed over me. He was so innocent, so pure, so utterly defenseless. He was everything Thomas had lost, everything Thomas seemed to despise. My pastoral heart ached, not just for Thomas in his suffering, but for the stark reality of the threat he represented. I concluded the homily, my voice, I hoped, betraying none of the turmoil within me, and we moved into the liturgy of the Eucharist. The collection baskets were passed, a brief rustle of envelopes and coins, A momentary distraction from the underlying tension that remained, a tight knot in the air, a silent hum of foreboding. I offered a silent prayer, a desperate, quick plea that rose from the very depths of my being, a cry from the shepherd's heart. Protect them, Lord. Protect us all. Protect Leo. It was a prayer born of profound helplessness, an acknowledgement that my human efforts, my words, my pastoral care had seemingly failed Thomas. I had tried to offer him solace, reconciliation, understanding, and he had met it with quiet, venomous scorn. Now, as the Mass progressed toward its most sacred moment, the moment of consecration, I could only appeal to a power far greater than my own. I never imagined, not in my wildest dreams, the form that protection would take. I prayed for a calming of hearts, for a change of mind, for an angelic guard to surround us. I prayed for an invisible shield, a subtle intervention, perhaps a spiritual warmth that would dissolve the hatred in Thomas's heart. I certainly did not pray for a spectacle, a blinding refutation of the natural order, an event that would shatter the very laws of physics. How could a man of logic, a man grounded in the daily realities of running a struggling parish, balancing budgets, counseling the afflicted, comforting the dying, even conceive of such a thing? My prayers were humble, human, limited by my own understanding of God's intervention in the world. I saw God's hand in small graces, in answered prayers for healing, in the unexpected generosity of a parishioner, in the quiet strength of faith that endured hardship. I saw God in the sunrise over our dilapidated steeple, in the resilience of a mother struggling against poverty, in the simple, unwavering devotion of a child like Leo. I did not imagine the impossible, the truly miraculous, the raw, undeniable unveiling of divine power in its most sublime form. But as I turned to the altar, preparing to consecrate the bread and wine, a chilling premonition whispered through me, a distinct sense that we were standing on the precipice of something extraordinary. It was a feeling that this moment, this first Holy Communion, would either shatter us completely, breaking the fragile peace of our community, and perhaps the very faith of our flock, or reveal the very face of God, in a way none of us could ever forget. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with an invisible energy, a palpable hum, as the sacred moment approached, carrying with it not just the promise of Christ's presence, but also the looming shadow of a confrontation I could not yet comprehend, a battle between light and darkness on our very altar. The premonition from chapter 4 had not receded. It lingered, a cold, insistent hand clutching at my spirit. It was a distinct sense that we were standing on the precipice of something extraordinary, a moment carved out of time itself. My long years in this holy calling, my decades tending to the sheep of St. Jude's, had honed a certain spiritual sensitivity, a subtle attunement to the unseen currents of grace and darkness that often swirl around human events. This feeling was unlike any other I had known. It was a deep conviction that this particular moment, this first Holy Communion, so filled with innocent joy and sacred promise, would either shatter us completely, breaking the fragile peace of our community and perhaps the very faith of our flock beyond repair, or it would reveal the very face of God in a way none of us could ever forget. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with an invisible energy, a palpable hum that vibrated not just in my ears, but deep within my very bones. It was the sound of destiny approaching, of something immense and inevitable. This sacred moment, so universally anticipated, carried with it not just the glorious promise of Christ's imminent presence in the Eucharist, but also the looming shadow of a confrontation I could not yet comprehend, a battle between the purest light and the deepest darkness, poised to unfold on our very altar. And so, despite the tremors within my soul, the Mass unfolded with its usual serene gravity, a sacred dance whose steps I knew by heart, yet whose profound mystery deepened astonishingly with every passing year. There is a profound comfort in ritual, a steadying rhythm that can anchor the spirit even in turbulent times. The ancient prayers, the familiar responses, the communal singing, these were the spiritual scaffolding that supported us all, a comfort I desperately leaned into on this disquieting morning. We had moved through the opening rites, the penitential act, where we humbly confessed our failings, pleading for God's boundless mercy. The Gloria ringing with the hopeful, albeit sometimes off-key, voices of our small choir, their earnest devotion touching the very rafters of our old church. The readings that day formed a carefully selected tapestry of promise and divine invitation, each word meant to nourish and prepare our souls for the banquet to come. As the liturgy of the Word proceeded, my heart felt the familiar rhythm of the faithful around me, their gentle murmurs rising and falling like a soft tide. The rustle of hymnals turned in unison, the shared breath of a community gathered in prayer, each soul a note in a larger divine symphony. For a moment, a fleeting one, I could almost forget the shadow that lurked. But beneath this surface calm, That chilling premonition from moments earlier still hummed, a low, persistent cello note beneath the brighter, more hopeful violins of our worship. It was a counterpoint that refused to be silenced, a dissonant chord in the otherwise harmonious liturgy. I stole a glance towards the back pew, a movement almost involuntary, towards the shadowy figure of Thomas, and my stomach clenched anew, a visceral knot of apprehension. He remained, still as a statue carved from granite, his head slightly bowed, his silhouette a stark, discordant shadow in the joyful tapestry woven by the white dresses of the children and the bright, expectant faces of their families. His presence felt like a tear in the fabric of our sacred space, a jarring reminder of the brokenness that so often sought to infiltrate even the holiest of moments. My homily that Sunday was not chosen lightly. It was rather a carefully considered plea, a pastoral reflection I had prepared with a heavy heart, one that felt heavier than usual with the weight of unseen forces converging. I knew the weight of expectation that rested on the small, eager shoulders of our first communicants, their eyes innocent, yet already seeking the profound. But more acutely, I felt the heavier burdens carried by the adults in our pews, burdens often unspoken, born in quiet desperation, the gnawing worry of bills, the pervasive loneliness of old age, the silent battles with addiction that ravaged families, the pain of lost loved ones, the deep sense of abandonment in a world that often felt devoid of grace. I had chosen to speak with all the conviction I could muster of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, of how God, in His infinite love, does not merely watch us from a distant heaven, an impassive judge, but makes Himself not just known to us through revelation, but physically present for us, truly, substantially present, in the humble guise of simple bread and wine. It was a mystery, yes, but a mystery meant not to confuse, but to comfort, to strengthen, to redeem, to offer the most profound intimacy possible between creature and Creator. I began by addressing the children, my gaze sweeping over their bright, scrubbed faces, alight with anticipation and a touch of understandable nervousness. Some fidgeted, others stared wide-eyed, yet all seemed to lean forward, sensing the solemnity of the occasion. "My dear children, and all of you my beloved parishioners," I started, my voice, I hoped, imbued with both warmth and the solemnity of the occasion, resonating through the old church. "Today is a truly special day, a milestone in your spiritual journey, a day we celebrate the most wonderful gift God has ever given us, Himself. Soon, many of you, for the very first time, will receive Jesus into your hearts in a way that is utterly unique, utterly profound. It is a moment you will remember for the rest of your lives, a moment when heaven touches earth within you, making you a living tabernacle of His presence." I paused, allowing my gaze to sweep across the congregation, letting the silence settle like a gentle blessing, a shared breath of expectation. I saw mothers dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs, tears of joy and perhaps memory shimmering there, fathers straightening their ties, a quiet gesture of pride and reverence, and grandparents beaming with a love that spanned generations, their faces etched with the wisdom of faith. And then, my eyes inadvertently drifted to the back, to Thomas. His head was still bowed slightly, a posture that could be interpreted as reverence or defiance, but I felt, rather than saw, his gaze upon me, a prickle of unnerving awareness that sent a chill down my spine. He was listening, intently, disturbingly so. "Now, when we speak of Jesus being present in the Eucharist," I continued, modulating my tone to become more reflective, more probing, aiming to demystify without diminishing the sacred, some might understandably wonder, how can that be? It still looks like bread, it still tastes like wine. And indeed, it does. Our human senses, those beautiful gifts from God that allow us to experience the world in all its rich texture, tell us one thing. But faith, my dear friends, that deeper faculty of the soul, that divine intuition within us, invites us to look beyond the surface, to listen with the heart, to perceive with the soul. For centuries, our church has taught us, as Jesus Himself taught us in the synagogue at Capernaum, provoking disbelief and even anger among some of His own followers, that when a priest, standing in persona Christi, in the person of Christ Himself, speaks the words of consecration over the bread and wine, they are transformed. They become the body and blood of Christ. Not symbolically, not merely metaphorically, as some might prefer to believe, to dilute the awesome truth, but truly and substantially while retaining the accidents, the outward appearances, of bread and wine. It is a mystery that transcends human reason, yes, a paradox, yet a truth that nourishes the very core of our being. A spiritual food that sustains us in ways our physical bodies can only dream of. I walked slowly from the ambo, the polished wood cool beneath my fingertips, its smoothness a testament to countless sermons delivered from this spot. I stepped closer to the altar, closer to the children in the front pews. Their small, eager faces, a mosaic of hope and burgeoning understanding, turned up to me. My eyes met Leo's. He sat with his hands folded in perfect prayer, his small frame radiating a quiet intensity, his eyes wide and earnest, soaking in every word, every nuance of my voice. In his pure devotion, I saw the very hope of St. Jude's, the unwavering faith we all long to possess, the simple, trusting heart that cuts through all intellectual complexities. Think of it, little ones, and grown-ups too, I urged, my voice softening, inviting them into a deeper contemplation, a personal encounter. Imagine if you were to meet Jesus face to face, right here, right now, in this very church. What would that feel like? How would you react? Would you fall to your knees in adoration? Would you weep for joy, for repentance? Would you simply gaze in speechless wonder? Well, every time we come to Mass, especially at that sacred moment of consecration, that is precisely what happens. Jesus, the Lord of all creation, who walked on water, who stilled the storms with a word, who healed the sick with a touch, who died for our sins and rose again, makes himself present here. He comes to us, truly present, body and blood, soul and divinity, hidden beneath these simple forms, so that we might receive him, so that he might nourish us, strengthen us, and fill us with his divine life. It is the most intimate encounter we can have on this side of heaven, a foretaste of the eternal banquet. My gaze softened even further as I looked at the young faces, and then broadened to encompass the entire congregation, my heart aching with both the weight of their struggles and the immensity of God's love that sought to meet them in those very struggles. Why would he do this? Why would God, in all his majesty, in all his awesome power, choose such a humble, unassuming way to be with us, to make himself so vulnerable, so available, so accessible? Because he loves us, profoundly and unconditionally, with a love that surpasses all human understanding. He knows our journey through this world is not easy. He knows we face trials, temptations, moments of doubt that can feel like spiritual deserts, and times when our faith feels stretched thin, almost to breaking. And he doesn't want us to walk alone. He doesn't want us to merely remember him from 2,000 years ago, a historical figure in a distant land, a memory fading with time. He wants to be with us, now, to be our companion on the dusty road of life, our solace in moments of sorrow, our unfailing strength for the road ahead, guiding us home through all the twists and turns, until we reach our eternal dwelling. I found myself speaking with a passion that welled up from the very core of my being, drawing upon the joys and sorrows of my decades as a priest in St. Jude's, the parish of lost causes, a place where the divine felt both desperately needed and tragically elusive. Here, in St. Jude's, we know what it means to feel lost, to feel forgotten by the world, to grapple with the raw edges of existence. We know the struggle. We see it in the weary eyes of those who seek refuge, in the quiet desperation that can sometimes settle over our neighborhood like a thick, suffocating fog, dimming every ray of hope. And it is precisely in these moments, when the world seems most harsh, when hope seems hardest to grasp, that the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist becomes not just a beautiful doctrine, but a vital lifeline, an anchor for the soul adrift. It is the tangible assurance that God has not abandoned us, that he has not forgotten us, that he is here, truly here, tangible and available, a rock in the shifting sands of our lives, a constant, unwavering presence. I thought of Thomas, of the raw, gaping wound left by his sister's death, a wound that had festered into a spiritual gangrene, consuming his family's once vibrant faith and curdling his grief into a cold, hard rage. I remembered his eyes, empty of light, filled with a venomous scorn for a God he felt had utterly deserted him in their hour of deepest need. And as I spoke these words, words of a God who draws close, who nourishes, who never abandons, I spoke them perhaps as much to him, silently sitting in the back, a grim silhouette, as to the eager, open-hearted children before me. I prayed that somehow, even through the hardened shell of his pain and anger, some sliver of grace might find purchase, that the truth I proclaimed might pierce the darkness that held him captive. When we receive communion, I continued, my voice growing a little softer, more intimate, a quiet plea, we are not just performing a ritual, a mere formality. We are entering into an intimate embrace with our Creator, an exchange of heart with the very source of all love. We are being fed by the very source of life itself, divine sustenance for our earthly pilgrimage. It's a foretaste of heaven, a promise that one day when all our struggles are over, we will feast with him eternally at the heavenly banquet. But it is also strength for today, for this very moment, to face whatever challenges lie before us, to love as he loved, to forgive as he forgave, and to carry our crosses with hope, knowing he carries them with us, always. For those of you receiving for the first time, my dear children, carry this truth in your hearts. Cherish this gift, for it is precious beyond measure. For those of us who have received him countless times, Let us never grow complacent. Never let routine dull our awe. Let us approach the altar with the same wonder, the same awe, the same profound humility as if it were our very first time and our very last. For it is here, in this simple bread and wine, in this profound act of self-giving, that God meets us where we are, not in grand displays of overwhelming power, but in quiet, transformative love, a love that understands our human frailty. It is here that He reminds us that He is always with us, especially when we feel most alone, most broken, most in need of His divine embrace. I ended my homily, a deep sigh escaping me, a silent prayer that my words, inadequate as they were, might penetrate the hearts of my flock, especially that one hardened heart in the back, that they might be more than just sound, but seeds of grace. As I made my way back to the altar, the usual gentle rustle of the congregation settling after the homily felt more subdued, more reflective. It was as if my words had indeed settled upon them, urging a deeper introspection, a quiet turning inward. Then, with a grace born of centuries of tradition, we moved into the liturgy of the Eucharist. The altar servers, Leo among them, approached the altar with disciplined precision, their young faces serious, preparing the chalice and paten, each movement a small, reverent offering. The collection baskets were passed, a quiet clinking of coins and soft rustle of bills, a humble offering of our earthly goods in preparation for the divine gifts to come, a testament to our reliance on God's providence and our willingness to share. As the preparation of the gifts concluded, a profound silence began to fall over the congregation. It was not the mere absence of noise, nor the restless quiet that sometimes descends when minds wander, distracted by worldly thoughts. No, this was something else entirely. This was the sacrum silentium, the holy quiet where heaven stoops to meet earth, where the temporal gives way to the eternal, where all human chatter fades before the divine. I could feel it, palpably, as if the very fabric of existence had thinned, allowing the unseen to draw near. My hands rested lightly on the cool, worn stone of the altar, a surface hallowed by countless masses, and the subtle chill seemed to ground me, anchoring me to this sacred space. The air in the church, which moments before had carried the mingling scents of fresh lilies and ancient incense, of beeswax candles and the faint sweet perfume of children's shampoo, now seemed to grow heavy, thick with an unspoken anticipation that transcended mere human expectation. It was as if the very molecules of the sanctuary were vibrating with a divine energy. Every breath I took felt measured, shallow, a silent offering. Every heart in the congregation, I imagined, beat a little slower, a little more reverently, synchronized by the spiritual gravity of the moment. The afternoon sun, a living presence, filtered through the vibrant stained glass windows, casting long jewel-toned streaks of crimson and sapphire, emerald and gold across the aisle, illuminating dust motes dancing like tiny ephemeral spirits in the hallowed air. These shafts of light transformed the sanctuary, making it feel less like a mere building of stone and wood, and more like a sacred threshold, a liminal space where the veil between heaven and earth grew thin. I closed my eyes for a moment, drawing a deep, cleansing breath, letting the profound stillness wash over me, penetrating my very soul. It was a silence born not of emptiness or absence, but of an overwhelming fullness, a silence pregnant with the imminent promise of divine presence. In that hallowed quiet, I could almost hear the faint rustle of angels' wings, the hushed whispers of saints who had knelt in places just like this, in countless churches across countless centuries, awaiting this very moment, this same miraculous transformation. The weight of generations of faith, of prayers offered with fervent hope, of sacrifices made in love, pressed gently upon me, a tangible spiritual presence that was both humbling and immensely powerful. I felt an undeniable connection, a seamless thread stretching back through time, to every priest who had ever stood at an altar, to every soul who had ever yearned for Christ's body and blood, reaching all the way back to the upper room itself, where this sacred meal was first instituted. When I opened my eyes, my gaze fell upon Leo. He was kneeling beside the altar, his small frame perfectly still, his hands clasped tightly, fingers intertwined in prayer. His face, usually so animated, was now a mask of sincere devotion, his eyes closed, long lashes resting on his pale cheeks. A tiny wrinkle furrowed his brow, a mark of deep concentration, of a soul utterly absorbed in the holiness of the moment, utterly present to the divine. He was a beacon of pure faith, an innocent vessel perfectly attuned to the sacred, his quiet reverence a sermon in itself, speaking volumes without a single word. His youthful purity, I thought, was what we were all striving for. The goodness that sometimes felt so elusive in our weary, often cynical lives. The peace in the church was so absolute, so tangible. It felt as though the entire world was holding its breath in anticipation of the sacred moment to come. The faint whispers of a faraway city, the distant hum of traffic, the mundane sounds of life outside, all seemed to recede, absorbed into this profound stillness. It was just us gathered in this humble church and the impending overwhelming presence of our Lord. My heart, still carrying that premonition of danger, now also swelled with an overwhelming sense of awe, a quiet trembling before the imminence of the divine, a mix of apprehension and exaltation. I turned to the altar, my hands reaching for the unleavened bread, the simple wafer that would soon be transformed, preparing to speak the ancient words that would bridge heaven and earth, words first uttered by Christ himself. The air thrummed, not with dread now, but with an almost unbearable sacred energy, a palpable anticipation of the miracle poised on the edge of manifestation, awaiting its fulfillment. The air thrummed, not with dread now, but with an almost unbearable sacred energy, a palpable anticipation of the miracle poised on the edge of manifestation, awaiting its fulfillment. My hands, calloused from years of ministry, yet trembling with a fragile reverence, reached for the unleavened bread. It was a simple, humble wafer, fragile and pale in the altar's candlelight, yet in that moment it held the weight of salvation, the promise of an incomprehensible mystery. My gaze fell upon Leo, still kneeling devoutly beside me, his small hands clasped, his eyes fixed on the altar with an unwavering trust. His presence, so pure and innocent, sharpened both my apprehension and my exaltation. This moment, this sacred offering, was for souls like his, for all of us yearning for grace. I lifted the pot gently, cradling the host in my left hand, my right hand poised to signify the blessing. A deep breath filled my lungs, carrying the lingering scent of lilies and old beeswax, a sacred perfume unique to St. Jude's. The silence in the church was profound now, a silence not of absence but of an overwhelming presence. It felt as though the very fabric of time had stretched thin, taut with anticipation, waiting for the bridge between heaven and earth to be built anew. Every eye, every heart, was focused on the altar, on this humble priest preparing to pronounce the most profound words in human history. My voice, usually robust, softened to a murmur, imbued with the weight of 2 millennia of faith, a whisper of continuity stretching back to the Last Supper itself. Accipite et manducate ex hoc omnes. My eyes closed for a fraction of a second, a silent prayer of unworthiness and total surrender. I opened them again, gazing at the small disk of bread, transforming it already in my mind, in my faith, into the unimaginable. And then, I spoke the words, the ancient hallowed words that have echoed through countless generations, whispered in catacombs and thundered in cathedrals, the very words of Christ. Hoc est enim corpus meum, quod pro vobis tradetur. For this is my body, which will be given up for you. It was in that precise, holy instant, as the final syllable of tradetur lingered in the air, a fleeting breath of divine promise, that the scream erupted. It was not a collective gasp this time, but a singular guttural cry of primal rage and terror, tearing through the sacred silence like a jagged blade through silk. My head snapped up, my gaze ripped from the consecrated host, my heart leaping into my throat with a sickening lurch. Thomas. He was no longer a shadow in the back pew. He was a blur of frenzied motion, a dark, malevolent force unleashed. He vaulted over the communion rail with a terrifying athleticism, his body contorting in the air for a horrifying split second, before his heavy boots thudded onto the marble floor of the sanctuary, mere feet from the altar. The movement was so sudden, so violent, it seemed to defy the very laws of physics, a manifestation of pure, unadulterated hatred given terrifying form. My mind, accustomed to the solemn rhythm of the Mass, struggled to process the unfolding horror. The glint of steel, the hunting knife, long and wicked, caught the light of the altar candles, flashing an obscene, hungry gleam. It was raised high, clutched in Thomas's hand, a grotesque extension of his venomous intent. His face, contorted by a rage so absolute it rendered him unrecognizable, was locked in a grimace of terrible purpose. His eyes, though, were fixed, not on me, but on the small, innocent figure beside me. His target was clear. Leo. My breath caught. Time, which had stretched moments before, now seemed to shatter, fragmenting into an agonizing series of microseconds. I saw Leo's head turn, his youthful face a mask of innocent confusion, his eyes wide with a dawning terror as he registered the rushing figure, the upraised arm, the glint of the knife. He was so small, so vulnerable, utterly unprepared for such malevolence. My mind screamed, but my body felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot, the consecrated host still cradled in my trembling hands. There was no time to move, no time to intervene, no time to even utter another word. The distance between Thomas and Leo was closing with terrifying speed. His arm began its downward arc, the blade whistling faintly through the air, destined for the boy's chest, for his heart, for the purity it sought to extinguish. And then, it happened. It was not a gradual emergence, not a gentle dawn. It was an eruption. From the small white wafer in my hands, the very body of Christ I had just consecrated, a light burst forth. It began as an impossible luminescence, a soft internal glow within the host itself, like a tiny star igniting in the hollow of my palm. But it did not stay contained. No, it expanded instantaneously, explosively, with a speed that defied comprehension. It was not a reflection of the candles, or the sanctuary lamps, or the morning sun struggling through the stained glass windows. No, this was a source. A pure, unadulterated, blindingly brilliant light that erupted from my fingers, emanating directly from the sacred bread. It expanded outwards in a silent, all-encompassing wave, a visible manifestation of divine power. The immediate effect was overwhelming. The vibrant hues of the stained glass windows, which moments before had painted the sanctuary floor with their earthly beauty, were utterly eclipsed. They became dull, lifeless panes of glass against this new, infinite brilliance. The flickering altar candles, once the brightest points in the sacred space, were instantly rendered obsolete, their flames shrinking to nothingness, swallowed whole by the nascent glory. Every shadow in the church vanished, obliterated, leaving no corner for darkness to hide. The light was pure white, yet it held within it the spectrum of all colors, an impossible fusion of radiance that transcended earthly perception. It was not merely bright, it was blinding. Yet paradoxically, it did not hurt my eyes. Instead, it pierced through them, through my very soul, with a searing clarity, revealing the world anew. It filled the sanctuary, not with a harsh, artificial glare, but with the pure white radiance of 1,000 suns, distilled into a single overwhelming moment of divine presence. The air itself seemed to vibrate, to hum with an unheard frequency, charged with this extraordinary energy. Dust motes, dancing in the morning light a moment before, now shimmered like tiny diamonds, suspended in the incandescent field. The very pillars of St. Jude's, ancient and weathered, seemed to glow from within, translucent and ethereal, as if for this brief, miraculous instant, the veil between the material and the spiritual had thinned to nothing. My own body was bathed in it, soaked in it, permeated by it. It was a warmth unlike any I had ever known, not a physical heat, but a profound spiritual warmth that reached into the deepest recesses of my being, dispelling fear, confusion, and even the primal shock of the attack. My hands, still cradling the host, felt as though they held not a wafer, but a pulsating star, a miniature galaxy of God's own glory. The small white disk itself, no longer just bread but truly the body of Christ, seemed to breathe, to expand, to pulsate with this impossible light, living and breathing with the very breath of creation. I was aware of the congregation behind me, though I could not see them, only sensed their collective gasp, their sudden intake of breath, now trapped in a moment of stunned silence that surpassed the earlier sacrum silentium. It was a silence born of awe, of wonder, of absolute disbelief. They were not just seeing light, they were experiencing it. They were bathed in it, immersed in it, transformed by it. Thomas, caught mid-arc, his knife a silent, deadly promise, was instantly engulfed. The light did not just fall upon him, it enveloped him, wrapped around him, held him in its irresistible embrace. For a fraction of a second, I saw his form silhouetted against the impossible brilliance, a stark, dark figure against a backdrop of pure, unadulterated divine power. He was frozen, utterly suspended in the very act of sin, caught in the eternal gaze of the light of the world. The knife, still grasped in his hand, seemed to lose its metallic glint, becoming dull, insignificant, powerless in the face of such overwhelming grace. The light emanating from the host, from the very presence of Jesus, pulsed. It was a silent testament to the real presence. The truth I had preached in my homily, now made manifest in a way that shattered all reason and logic, asserting itself with an undeniable force. This was not a symbol, this was reality. This was God, here, now, intervening, declaring His presence, defending His own, radiating His infinite love and His boundless power. The world had stopped, and in its place for this impossible moment was only the light, the divine light of Christ, burning away the darkness, asserting its dominion, a profound, breathtaking miracle unfolding before my very eyes. The light. It was not merely a vision to be observed by the eye, nor a simple illumination of the sanctuary. No, my dear friends, it was an experience that permeated every fiber of one's being, a wave that washed over the very core of our souls. It carried with it an inexplicable warmth, not the heat of a flame, but the gentle, all-encompassing embrace of a mother's love. And with that warmth came an ineffable peace, a stillness so profound that it silenced not only the frantic beating of my own heart, but seemed to quell the very anxieties of the world. It was a peace that felt ancient, eternal, a peace that promised everything would be made whole. This was not a peace derived from the absence of conflict, but from the overwhelming presence of an absolute perfect love. A love so vast, so powerful, so utterly good, that to fully bear it felt almost unbearable, for our finite vessels strained to contain such boundlessness. It was this wave, this tide of divine tenderness, that crashed directly into Thomas. I saw it, not with my physical eyes alone, but with a deeper spiritual sight that seemed to awaken within me at that moment. He had been a blur of dark motion, a predator launched with deadly intent. But as the light surged from the consecrated host in my hands, as it filled every crevice of that sacred space, he stopped, just stopped. His body, propelled by momentum and fury, became utterly rigid, frozen mid-stride, an ancient tableau of human will confronted by divine decree. His arm raised high, the hunting knife a dark, glinting extension of his rage, locked in place, unable to complete its wicked arc. He was caught, suspended, no longer master of his own movements, but held captive by an unseen, yet undeniably present force. The light enveloped him completely. It was as if he had plunged into a luminous ocean, a sea of pure grace that surrounded him, penetrated him, and began to work its impossible alchemy. I saw his face, now starkly illuminated, every line and shadow suddenly laid bare. What had been a mask of venomous hatred, contorted by grief and rage, began to melt. It was a slow, agonizing transformation, played out across features that had, moments before, promised murder. First, there was shock. His eyes, wide with murderous intent, flickered, then widened further, not with fear of discovery, but with sheer disbelieving astonishment. His mouth, set in a grim line, parted slightly, a soft gasp escaping, as if the very air had been knocked from his lungs. Then, confusion. The pure, radiant light, so antithetical to the darkness he carried within, seemed to short-circuit the pathways of his understanding. His brow furrowed, his head tilted almost imperceptibly, as if trying to reconcile what his senses were experiencing with the universe he thought he knew. What was this? What power was this that rendered his hatred impotent, his strength irrelevant? But the light did not merely confuse. It revealed. It pierced through the layers of pain and anger he had built around himself, reaching the raw, wounded core of his being. And then came the anguish, a soul-shattering anguish, not of the body, but of the spirit. It was the anguish of one who, for the first time in perhaps years, saw the depth of his own despair, the terrible chasm of his choices, and the profound isolating darkness he had allowed to consume him. I could almost hear the silent scream of his soul as the light exposed the gaping wounds of his sister's death, the bitterness, the resentment he had harbored against God, against the world, against himself. It was the pain of a man suddenly confronted with the beautiful, terrible truth of what he had become, and what he had been about to do. His body began to tremble, no longer from the effort of his attack, but from an inner earthquake. The knife, that instrument of vengeance and despair, no longer held meaning. It seemed to grow heavy in his nerveless grasp, no longer an extension of his will, but an alien dead weight. And then, with a sharp echoing clatter, it fell. The sound, amplified by the sudden absolute silence of the church, was like a bell tolling the end of one era and the beginning of another. It struck the polished marble floor of the sanctuary, skittered for a moment, and then lay still, utterly powerless, an abandoned symbol of a war that had just ended, not with human force, but with divine intervention. As the knife clattered, Thomas crumpled. It was not a fall of defeat, but of utter surrender. His knees buckled, his rigid form collapsing with a shuddering release, bringing him to the very foot of the altar. His head bowed, not in defiance, but in profound obeisance, until his forehead touched the cold marble floor. And then, he began to sob. My friends, these were not the hot, dry, angry sobs of a man consumed by bitterness. These were the deep, wrenching, purifying tears of a soul unburdened, of a heart cracked open. They flowed freely, ceaselessly, washing away years of accumulated grief, rage, and spiritual desolation. They were the tears of a man who had just looked upon the face of God, not in judgment, but in merciful, overwhelming love. It was the sound of a broken vessel being mended, a lost lamb finding its shepherd, a prodigal son returning home. In that moment, the anger that had defined him was not merely suppressed, it was dissolved, utterly consumed by the fire of divine grace. All this unfolded in what felt like an eternity, yet was but a few swift seconds. Around me the entire congregation remained frozen, held in the thrall of the miraculous. No one moved, no one screamed, no one ran. The initial gasp, the collective drawing of breath, had been held, suspended in the sacred silence. Mothers clutched their children, not in terror, but in a protective embrace that quickly softened into awe. I saw the faces of my parishioners etched with disbelief, yes, but more profoundly with wonder. Their eyes, once wide with fear, were now shining with an incandescent light of their own, mirroring the brilliance that had filled the church. Leo, the innocent target, stood beside me, his small hands still folded in prayer, his eyes fixed on the weeping man at the altar, a child's quiet understanding dawning in their depths. Even he, in his youth, sensed that this was not merely an event, but a holy encounter. And then, as swiftly and inexplicably as it had come, the light began to recede. It did not vanish abruptly, but rather softened, dimming gradually like the embers of a divine fire. The intense brilliance lessened, allowing the familiar stained glass hues to reassert themselves, though they seemed duller now, somehow muted by comparison. The warmth lingered, a gentle afterglow that settled deep within our bones, a spiritual imprint of what had just transpired. The scent of lilies returned, mingling with something new in the air, a freshness, a clean, sharp scent of spiritual renewal, like rain after a long drought. What remained was a stunned, silent congregation, kneeling or standing, motionless in their pews, many with tears streaming down their own faces, tears of gratitude, of recognition, of renewed belief. And at the foot of the altar, a broken man, weeping, his face still pressed to the marble, his body racked with sobs that reverberated through the hushed church. He was physically present, a stark figure of contrition, but spiritually he was already somewhere else, somewhere profoundly new. I stood there, the consecrated host still in my trembling hands, its light now subsided, yet its presence more palpable than ever. My voice, when I finally managed to speak, was a whisper, raw with emotion. "Behold the Lamb of God," I began, the words of the liturgy now imbued with an unbearable weight of truth, "who takes away the sins of the world." For in that moment, before all of us, the Lamb had indeed taken away a great sin, not just by averting an attack, but by transforming a heart consumed by hatred into one overflowing with penitence and, I dared to hope, with a burgeoning love. The miracle was not just in the light, or in the stayed hand, or even in the dropped knife. The miracle was in the profound, utterly undeniable spiritual rebirth that had just taken place before our very eyes, at the very heart of the sacred liturgy, at the moment of consecration. It was a testament to the fact that God's mercy is boundless, that His love can penetrate even the hardest heart, and that His real presence among us is not merely a theological concept, but a living, active, transformative force. The world had stopped, yes, but it had also been remade, for a man, and for a parish, in the blink of a divine eye. And as I looked upon Thomas, still weeping at the altar, I knew with every fiber of my priestly being that this was only the beginning of a profound new chapter, both for him and for St. Jude's. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the reverberations of heaven touching earth, a sacred symphony of grace. The silence that followed was not the void of absence, but a profound, almost agonizing fullness. It was the silence of a world recalibrating, of hearts suspended between the impossible and the undeniable. No one rushed forward, no one screamed in lingering terror. Instead, as if moved by an unseen divine hand, the entire congregation, that sea of startled faces and joyous children, slowly, reverently, dropped to their knees. The rustle of clothes, the soft thud of knees on kneeler, became a sacred counterpoint to the thud of the dropped knife, a collective act of surrender and awe. I watched, my own heart thrumming with a mixture of shock and an unshakable certainty. Thomas remained crumpled at the foot of the altar, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His transformation, though sudden and violent, was complete. The rage, the venom, the icy scorn that had once clouded his eyes had been burned away, leaving behind the raw, exposed wound of a soul in profound repentance. This was no mere aversion of a crime. This was a complete, agonizing, and beautiful remaking. They had not just witnessed a child's life spared, they had witnessed their faith made manifest, a tangible tear in the veil between heaven and earth. The Mass, in that moment, became an act of pure, spontaneous adoration. We remained on our knees, not just the altar servers, not just the usual devout, but every single person present, from the babes in their mother's arms to the skeptical father who usually slipped out after communion. Prayers rose not as recited formulas, but as a spontaneous outpouring of gratitude and bewildered praise. I finished the consecration, my voice tremulous but firm, holding the sacred host, now still and white, yet forever imbued with the memory of that blinding light. The communion that followed was the most profound I have ever officiated. Each communicant approached with eyes shining, not just with reverence, but with the undeniable knowledge of a God who walks among us, who intervenes in our messy, broken lives. After Mass, the church remained open, bathed in the soft afternoon light that now seemed even more luminous. I found Thomas still at the altar, now kneeling with his head resting on the marble, utterly spent. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed but cleared of their former darkness. He asked for confession, his voice a hoarse whisper. We moved to the confessional, the small familiar booth suddenly feeling like the holiest place on earth. Through tears that flowed freely and ceaselessly, Thomas recounted his story, not as a confession of attempted murder, but as the harrowing testimony of a man rescued from himself. He spoke of the suffocating grief for his sister, of the bitterness that had poisoned his every thought, of the festering hatred for a God he believed had abandoned them. He spoke of watching me, of watching Leo, the innocent light that inflamed his resentment. He confessed the dark intent that had consumed him, the perverse desire to shatter the sacred peace, to destroy the faith he hated. But then, his voice dropped to a reverent hush as he described the light. He said it was not just light, but pure love, a warmth that simultaneously burned away his hatred and healed his soul's deepest wounds. He spoke of feeling utterly exposed, his inner darkness laid bare, yet in that exposure he found not condemnation, but an overwhelming embrace. He described seeing not just the wafer in my hand, but a radiant living Christ, whose eyes met his, not with judgment, but with an agonizing sorrow for his pain and an infinite merciful welcome. He realized in that blinding instant that he wasn't attacking God. He was attacking himself, his last vestiges of hope. The light, he said, was not a barrier but a lifeline, pulling him back from the abyss he himself had dug. His tears were not of sorrow for his failure, but of profound, cleansing repentance and overwhelming gratitude for a divine rescue. The miracle at St. Jude's did more than save Leo's life. It became the very foundation of our parish's renewal. News travels fast, even in our forgotten corner of the city. People who had long abandoned the church, drawn by curiosity or a flicker of rekindled hope, began to return. Our weary flock, whose faith had often flickered like a candle in a draught, now burned with an incandescent brightness. The collection basket, once a source of constant worry, overflowed. But more importantly, our community, once marked by quiet desperation, now radiated a tangible sense of hope and purpose. The miracle had peeled back the layers of cynicism and despair, revealing the living heart of faith that had always beat within St. Jude's. And Thomas, my lost cause, is with us still. He is no longer a ghost haunting the periphery, but a pillar of our community. He now serves as an usher, his quiet, reverent presence a testament to the fact that divine mercy can find us even in our most violent, desperate moments. He tends to the church gardens with meticulous care, his hands, once poised for destruction, now nurturing life. He attends daily mass, his head bowed, his eyes often fixed on the altar, a silent witness to the real presence he once denied. He speaks little of that day, but his life, lived with an humility and fervent faith that moves all who know him, is his ongoing sermon. He proves, as does the enduring memory of that impossible light, that Jesus Christ is not a distant historical figure, confined to ancient texts and dusty paintings, but a living, present reality. He is among us, truly, substantially present in the Eucharist, and he remains with his flock, especially in our moments of deepest need, and most profoundly at the moment of consecration. The sacred silence that filled our church that day was not an ending, but a beginning, the opening note of a new symphony of grace, played out in the transformed lives of a lost man and a rediscovered parish, echoing the everlasting promise that even in our darkest hour, the light of Christ will always break through.